2.1 lets pipes report fluid type and temperature to the circuit network. That does not make the factory think. It gives circuit logic a new sense, the start of a nervous system. In an experimental update this large, that can look like one small change, but it is only the first layer. Signals can choose research, cross planets, and guide moving machines. Red and green wires connect pipes, underground pipes, and storage tanks, turning fluid type and temperature into circuit signals. Before 2.1, players inferred fluid state through timers, tank levels, or indirect machine signals. The logic saw clues, not always the condition that mattered. Now, the fluid itself can become the signal. As a heavy oil tank fills, its signal can stop the pump. If temperature drops, the network can start a backup. The player decides what each signal triggers. Those capabilities make 2.1 tempting. But because the release is experimental, understanding what the factory gains is only half of the decision. The other half is whether those gains justify bringing 2.1 anywhere near your main save. We can answer that only after seeing what the update actually enables. Reading a condition is useful. Acting on it is where the update becomes more interesting. At the center of a research area, a laboratory sits between belts carrying red, green, blue, and more advanced science packs. In 2.1, laboratories can connect to the circuit network. They can read their contents, the cost of the current research, and the technology level being studied. Circuit conditions can also select the active research. That distinction matters. The update does not hand the factory a strategy. It gives players the parts needed to encode one. When one production line runs short of a required material, its circuit signal can reach the laboratory and replace the current research with a priority chosen by the player. The same structure could later select repeated technologies according to available science or research cost. The decision remains yours, but it can now be stored in the factory instead of repeated manually every time. Perception can now drive a decision. So far, however, every signal has remained inside one local network. The next change removes that boundary.
A radar on Nauvis can now use universe mode to receive a circuit signal from the factory around it. Far above the planet, a radar on an industrial space platform receives that same information. A condition detected on the ground can now influence a system operating in orbit. When an orbital platform runs short of repair supplies, its hub can convert that condition into a logistics request. Supplies can then arrive from a planet or another platform. If several requested loads are small, the cargo can travel together in one mixed rocket instead of using a separate launch for each type. These are several technical features, but they belong to one larger idea. The logistics network can react across distance. A platform short on repair supplies, fuel components, or construction material can be integrated into a broader system of signals and requests. The update does not remove the need to design routes, conditions, and priorities. It makes those designs more expressive. A factory on the ground and a platform in orbit can behave less like isolated builds and more like parts of one machine. Pipes, laboratories, and radars extend the logic of fixed infrastructure. Spidertrons apply the same principle to something that moves. A Spidertron stands taller than the nearby assemblers, its armored body supported by long mechanical legs. In 2.1, Spidertrons gain patrol support. The Spidertron remote can also send these units toward pinned locations, allowing them to follow routes through the factory or around its perimeter. This opens a different kind of automation. Circuit signals control machines that remain fixed in place. Patrol routes give movement to units that can carry equipment, cross difficult terrain, and repeat work across a large base. The player still defines the route and purpose, but the Spidertron no longer needs a fresh manual destination for every circuit around the factory. Not every improvement operates at planetary scale. Some of the most useful automation begins by removing the tiny corrections that interrupt a design every time it is reused. Mirror a production block, and the inserter now turns with the rest of the design instead of keeping its old direction. Pump jacks and burner mining drills receive the same flipping support. The mechanical arm that once pointed away from the belt now faces the correct side as part of the mirrored layout. Cross-surface signals reduce strategic intervention. Reliable mirroring reduces mechanical cleanup. Both move the final factory closer to the design the player intended. Automation only helps when the player can still understand what the system is doing. Factorio 2.1 supports that readability in two ways. First, the fluid system exposes its condition more clearly. A pipe or storage tank can reveal which fluid fills the connected line and how hot that fluid is. If two incompatible fluids are about to share a connection, the conflict appears before the player buries the mistake inside a larger build. The visual and sound updates solve a different problem. An idle refinery now looks still and subdued. When production begins, its machinery moves, heated fluid glows through the system, and the surrounding reflections change with the activity. Updated industrial sounds reinforce the same contrast. One group helps diagnose the system. The other helps the factory communicate its operating state at a glance. That brings us back to the migration decision. Woob warned that saves from version 2.0 could be loaded into 2.1, but some changes might break existing factory designs. The studio recommended backing up saves and blueprints before switching. Once those saves and blueprints are updated, they cannot be downgraded to 2.0. Mods that matter to a factory may also need time to catch up. Before moving a main factory, check the current release status and the compatibility of every essential mod. The underlying decision is still the same. If you enjoy testing circuits, rebuilding systems, and discovering new interactions, 2.1 offers a large workshop. Make a separate copy of the save, preserve important blueprint books, and expect some designs to need attention.
If the main factory depends on a complex mod list, if the save is irreplaceable, or if every blueprint needs to remain stable, waiting is not a failure to keep up. It is simply the cautious choice until the version and the tools around it meet the level of stability you need. Factorio was already a game about replacing manual work with systems. Version 2.1 does not make the factory think for you. It gives you more ways to tell the factory what to notice, which conditions matter, where signals should travel, and which actions should repeat without constant intervention. A pipe reports what is flowing through the factory. A laboratory turns a signal into a research choice. A radar carries that signal beyond the planet. In orbit, a platform converts the information into a logistics request. Back on the ground, a Spidertron repeats the route defined by the player. The engineer still writes the logic. But the factory can now respond to far more of what is happening inside it, around it, and far beyond the planet below. Which change would make you test 2.1 first? And what would need to be stable before you moved your main save?